Knee-deep in brown water, I watched the community connector split like a rotten seam and felt the wetland breathe again. Weeks earlier, HOA President Brooke Langford had waved glossy renderings and called my marsh-wasted space. Today, the asphalt she forced across Cedar Hollow Meadows wasn't a road, it was a dam, and the storm had come to collect. I'm Daniel Mercer, an environmental hydrologist who spent 20 years telling people not to build where water remembers. They ignored Section 404 permits, mocked FEMA floodplain maps, and laughed when I said wetlands are sponges, not obstacles. Now sirens wailed, porch lights blinked underwater, and a white SUV spun in a brown current like a toy. Brooke once promised progress. Gravity had other plans. I hit record on my drone not for revenge but for proof. Culverts set too high flow lines, severed pressure fractures racing across her empire of shortcuts. Nature doesn't argue, it audits. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. When I first bought the land at the southern edge of Cedar Hollow, it was the kind of quiet that city people pay millions to pretend they have open sky tall reeds and a chorus of frogs, so loud it drowned out thought. The soil was rich, black, and alive. Every ripple of water carried dragonflies. Every dusk the air smelled like rain and moss. I'd spent my career consulting on floodplain zoning for the state, watching developers gamble against nature and lose. So when I found 30 acres of untouched wetland outside of a small HOA-managed subdivision, I saw more than land. I saw balance. It was the kind of place that absorbed everything, storms, runoff, even noise. I called it the Hollow. The residents called it that mosquito pit. For years, things stayed peaceful. The HOA was led by an older couple who cared more about Christmas lights than control. But peace in these neighborhoods never lasts. All it takes is one visionary. That visionary arrived in a bright red SUV with a magnetic logo that read Langford Realty. Her name was Brooke Langford, and her voice carried like a megaphone even when she whispered. Within a week of moving in, she was running for HOA president. Within a month, she'd won by promising to modernize the community. Her first target was my wetland. At the first board meeting under her reign, Brooke stood before a crowd of retirees, young families, and a few business owners flipping through slides of aerial maps. Imagine, she said, smiling wide, a beautiful new access road linking Cedar Hollow to the interstate, faster commutes, higher property values, safer emergency routes. People nodded. Convenience is always the first bribe of destruction. Then she gestured to a shaded blue patch on the map, my wetland. We'll clear this underused area for the road, she said. It's barely even real water, just soggy land. I raised my hand. That soggy land is a federally protected wetland under the Clean Water Act. Section 404 makes it illegal to fill or drain without a permit. Brooke's smile didn't falter. Oh, we're not filling it, she said sweetly. We're improving it. The room chuckled. I didn't. After the meeting, I caught her in the parking lot beside her spotless SUV. You can't build a road through a wetland, I said flatly. It's a retention zone. It keeps your basements dry. She tilted her head, her perfume heavy in the humid air. Then maybe you can donate a small portion for the good of the neighborhood. Donate, I repeated. This isn't a bake sale. It's my property. Her smile turned sharp. Then you'll be the only one standing in the way of progress. That was the first warning sign. The next came by mail. Violation notice. Overgrown vegetation. Standing water hazard. Property not in harmony with community standards. I laughed out loud when I read it. Harmony. It was a wetland. Its entire purpose was to hold water. I called the HOA office. They said President Langford had received multiple complaints. I asked for names. They said anonymous. Typical. By the third notice, the fines started $250, then $500. I sent them a binder full of environmental documentation maps from the Army Corps of Engineers, soil data, satellite imagery, and my own state-issued hydrology license. Brooke never responded directly. Instead, I saw her husband's construction truck start parking near the property line. Then came the survey stakes, bright orange, driven deep into the mud like teeth. I walked out there with my camera filming every one. You're trespassing, I told the foreman. He shrugged. We got HOA authorization. HOA authorization doesn't override federal law, I snapped. He smirked. Take it up with the boss lady. That night, I filed official complaints with the county zoning board, the state environmental agency, and the EPA regional office. I knew the process would take weeks, maybe months. Brooke was counting on that delay. Bureaucracy moves slower than bulldozers. A few days later, I received a glossy flyer in my mailbox, Cedar Hollow's new access road, progress you can drive on. Beneath the slogan was a digital rendering of a pristine asphalt road running right over my wetland. They even had the nerve to label it community property. That's when I realized her strategy. She wasn't just breaking the law, she was rewriting public perception first. If the neighborhood believed the wetland was already HOA land, no one would question the construction. So, I fought back the only way I knew how, with facts. I uploaded a public report, maps, legal citations, drone footage titled, "Why Cedar Hollow is About to Flood Itself." I posted it on the town's community forum. For a day it exploded. Some residents thanked me. Others accused me of fear-mongering. Then, without warning, the post vanished. My account was banned. Brooke had connections in the forum's moderation team, her sister to be exact. The following week, I spotted heavy machinery near the southern boundary. Excavators, dump trucks, the kind of equipment that hums with arrogance. I grabbed my camera and walked straight up to the site. Brooke was there wearing a bright orange blazer and oversized sunglasses. She looked like a politician posing for a campaign ad. "Morning, Daniel," she called out, "just making the community a little better." I pointed to the mud-splattered blade of a bulldozer inches from my cattails. "You're committing a felony. Relax," she said with a laugh. "We've got the county's blessing. No, you have a contractor and a forged map." She smirked. "Then prove it." "I will." Her husband stepped forward, arms crossed. "We've got schedules to meet. Either move your truck or we'll have it towed." I met his glare. "Try it." They didn't tow it, but they didn't stop either. By evening, the first section of wetland grass had been flattened into a gray scar. That night I sat at my desk, surrounded by maps, open law books, and the sound of frogs croaking outside like defiant witnesses. My hands trembled as I wrote my final note for the day. They've declared war on nature. Nature always wins. The next morning, I drove into town to file an emergency injunction. The clerk, a tired woman behind bulletproof glass, glanced at the forms. "Another HOA dispute," she muttered. "Not a dispute," I said. "An environmental crime." She stamped the papers without looking up. "It'll take a week for review." A week. I stared at the wet ink of her stamp, realizing Brooke could pave half the hollow before anyone even read the first page. When I stepped outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind carried the smell of rain and diesel. A storm was coming. And this time I wasn't going to warn her again. By the end of that week, the first drops of rain had started to fall soft and scattered like nature, whispering a warning before shouting. But Brooke didn't listen. She never did. Her construction crews kept working through the drizzle, dumping gravel, compacting soil, driving steel stakes right through what used to be cattail beds. They called it site preparation. I called it vandalism. Each morning, I walked the perimeter with my camera documenting everything. I logged GPS coordinates, timestamps, even drone footage of the destroyed marsh. The footage showed it all trenches dug where frogs used to spawn runoff water, turning from clear to muddy brown, and workers installing a temporary bridge across what they called the ditch. The ditch, of course, was a natural runoff channel, a vital artery that carried rainwater into the river basin. Once blocked, the wetland would choke. On the third morning, I saw her again. Brooke Langford, umbrella in hand, red coat spotless against the gray rain. She wasn't even pretending to hide her arrogance anymore. "Morning, Daniel," she called, stepping over a puddle as if the mud itself would stain her reputation. "Beautiful progress, isn't it?" I pointed at the pile of broken reeds beside the bulldozer. "You're burying an ecosystem." She twirled her umbrella lazily. "Correction, I'm building a community. And don't worry, I've checked the maps. It's all technically within the HOA boundary." "Those maps are fabricated," I snapped. "I've seen the originals. You can't redraw property lines with Photoshop." She laughed softly, tilting her head. "Well, tell that to the county. They already signed off on the development variance." That stopped me cold. "What variance?" Brooke smirked. "You'll find out when the papers reach your mailbox." 2 days later, they did. An official-looking envelope from Cedar Hollow County Planning Department. Inside, an updated zoning notice showing a newly added public easement running straight through my property. The signature line belonged to Deputy Commissioner Howard Leach, a man I'd once seen shaking Brooke's hand at a charity golf tournament. My stomach dropped. This wasn't incompetence anymore. It was collusion. I called the commissioner's office immediately. His secretary answered, voice too cheerful for the situation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer, but the variance was approved based on community interest and safety needs. You're welcome to file an appeal." "An appeal?" I said, incredulous. "You just authorized illegal construction on federally protected land. I understand your frustration," she said calmly. But the Board of Supervisors reviewed the HOA's application and determined the impact was minimal. Minimal, I nearly shouted. You've just turned a floodplain into a highway. I'm sorry, sir. The decision stands. Click. That night I met with my old friend Evelyn Cho, an environmental attorney I'd worked with on previous flood zone audits. We sat in a diner off Route 5, rain hammering the windows. She looked over the documents, brow furrowed. They can't do this legally, she muttered. Even if the county signed off, federal law supersedes. You need to file for an injunction right now. I already did, I said. But the review takes a week. She sighed. Then buy yourself a week. Slow them down. Make noise. I've tried, I said bitterly. They call me paranoid. Evelyn looked up, eyes hard. Then prove them wrong. Document everything before, during, and after. If this floods, it's not just their problem anymore. It's evidence. By the time I got home, the rain had stopped. The sky had that uneasy yellow tint that always follows a storm, too calm, too silent. The wetland glistened like glass under the porch light. I knew it was breathing still, fighting to absorb what water it could, but its lungs were shrinking. The next morning, I found surveyors from Langford Construction standing knee-deep in the reeds, spray painting numbers onto steel stakes. I approached with my camera rolling. You have no authorization to be here, I said. One of them, a young man, no older than 25, hesitated. Ma'am, sir, we're just following orders from Mrs. Langford. Orders don't override law. Do you have federal permits? He blinked clearly, unsure what I meant. We've got HOA paperwork. Then you're trespassing, I said. Every shovel of dirt you move is a potential felony under the Clean Water Act, Section 404. The foreman, an older man with a thick mustache, scoffed. Buddy, you're not scaring anyone. We've been told this land's community property. Got signatures and everything. Signatures from crooks, I said coldly. He leaned forward. You calling my boss a crook? No, I replied, stepping closer. I'm calling your client one. He glared at me for a long moment, then turned back to his crew. Pack it up, he grunted. We'll finish the rest tomorrow. They left, but I knew it wouldn't last. That evening, I went to the county records office to pull every property file related to Cedar Hollow. It took hours. Dusty drawers, faded documents, half-legible signatures, but I found it the original 1,984 plat map, clearly marking my southern property line as the natural flood retention basin. No easements, no road allowances, nothing. The new variance Brooke had submitted was based on a fake overlay map that shifted the line north by about 200 feet, just enough to claim the wetland. I took photos, copies, notarized everything. The next day I showed up at the HOA's special meeting. The community hall was packed, dozens of residents, sipping coffee, half listening, as Brooke stood at the podium with a slideshow of Phase 1 road construction. I waited until she started bragging about community approval before stepping forward. Correction, I said, loudly holding up my documents. This project is built on forged zoning maps and violates both county and federal law. The room went silent. Brooke froze for half a second before her politician's smile returned. Mr. Mercer, we've all seen your reports. But these are official county documents. I slammed my copies on the table. No, they're not. These are the originals. Certified in 1984, signed by the county engineer. Your version has altered coordinates and a non-existent surveyor's stamp. Whispers filled the room. A few neighbors leaned forward, whispering to one another. Brooke's jaw tightened. Well, she said after a moment, then I'm sure the county will sort this out. In the meantime, construction continues. I stared at her in disbelief. You'd rather risk federal prison than admit you're wrong, she smiled thinly. Progress doesn't wait for paperwork. That was her mistake. Because neither does karma. That night, the first thunderstorm of the season rolled in. I stood on my porch, rain soaking through my shirt, watching the unfinished road glisten under lightning flashes. The water pooled in places it never had before, trapped by the fresh gravel and compacted soil. The drainage channel was gone, buried under Brooke's progress. I marked the water level on a stake 6 inches higher than normal after just 2 hours of rain. I didn't need a forecast to know what was coming. The next storm wouldn't be gentle. And when it came, it would test everything she'd built. The next few days were a blur of noise engines, shovels, the metallic shriek of bulldozers clawing into soaked ground. The sound echoed through Cedar Hollow like a countdown. Every morning I woke to the same view, diesel fog rolling across my wetland bright safety vests, moving where herons once stood, and Brooke Langford perched at the edge of the site with her tablet, directing the chaos like a general too proud. to see the battlefield crumbling beneath her. By Tuesday, she had turned the marsh into a crater. The once soft reeds were gone, replaced by black gravel that drank the rain but refused to drain it. Each shovel of dirt was a nail in the neighborhood's coffin, though no one wanted to hear it. The HOA's Facebook page glowed with posts about community improvement. Brooke uploaded photos of smiling workers beside her red SUV, captioned, "Building a better tomorrow for Cedar Hollow." I posted a warning under her photo, "Tomorrow will drown if you keep paving today." It was deleted within an hour. My account was banned again. That evening, my neighbor Bill Tanner, a retired electrician who'd lived in the area longer than any of us, knocked on my door. He held a folded newspaper and a grim look. "You've seen this?" he asked, handing it to me. The front page headline read, "County backs HOA road project. Local expert disagrees." Underneath was a photo of me mid-sentence from the last public meeting, mouth open, eyes half closed, looking like a man shouting at clouds. Brooke's quote was printed beneath Mr. Mercer is passionate but misinformed. Our engineers have confirmed the project's safety. Engineers, I muttered. You mean her husband and his golf buddies? Bill nodded slowly. Thought you should know. Folks are starting to pick sides. Which side are you on? I asked. He chuckled. The side that stays dry. When he left, I sat alone on the porch, staring into the dark. The frogs were quiet now. The air felt heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. That night, my phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. Stop recording. You've been warned. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. No signature, no context, but I didn't need one. Brooke was getting desperate. I decided to escalate. The next morning, I called Evelyn. I've got harassment now, I told her. They're trying to intimidate me. Good, she said bluntly. That means they're scared. Keep documenting. She helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, citing federal wetland protection statutes, and mailed copies to both the HOA and the county commissioner's office. But I knew paperwork alone wouldn't stop the storm, not the legal one, not the real one. That evening, radar alerts lit up my phone, tropical system forming over the Gulf. Projected path uncertain. The meteorologist sounded calm. I wasn't. I'd seen the charts. The system wasn't uncertain, it was aiming straight for us. By Thursday, the rain returned harder this time. Thick sheets pounding the gravel road like drums of judgment. I pulled on my raincoat and grabbed my flashlight. The air smelled of diesel and ozone. As I reached the site, I saw the first signs of what I'd been warning everyone about. Water pooled against the raised embankment where the new access road sliced through the land. The culverts, 2 cheap steel pipes her husband had installed, were clogged with debris. The flow line sat 3 feet too high. The water had nowhere to go but up. I filmed everything, narrating over the roar of rain. Day 9 of construction, I said into the mic. Flow obstruction confirmed. Surface runoff rising faster than baseline. Culverts failing. Then I heard voices. Brooke was there again, standing under a blue umbrella, talking to one of the contractors. Her heels sank into the mud, but she didn't seem to notice. We can't delay, she barked. Finish the asphalt section before the weekend. The ribbon cutting is Saturday. Ma'am, the foreman said uneasily, ground's too soft. We'll lose the rollers. Then bring heavier rollers, she snapped. I stepped out from behind the machinery. You'll lose more than rollers if you keep this up. She turned startled, then sighed. Oh, it's you again. Shouldn't you be home writing your angry blog posts? I'm documenting criminal evidence, I said evenly. You're building an unpermitted barrier in a designated flood zone. Brooke smiled, eyes glinting. You really think anyone's going to believe you over an elected HOA president? Elected doesn't mean qualified, I shot back. Or sane. Her expression hardened. You need to leave, Daniel. This is an active job site. This is my property, I reminded her. Every inch of mud you're standing on belongs to me. Then sue me, she said, and walked away. It was almost comical how predictable she'd become. But the storm wasn't predictable. The rain thickened, lightning streaking across the horizon. The ground trembled faintly under each thunderclap. I could already see the runoff swirling higher around the embankment. By the time I got home, the road leading into the neighborhood was half submerged. My gauges showed the water level rising an inch every 15 minutes. I sent the data to Evelyn along with a dozen photos. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Got it. This is your smoking gun. Keep filming. Don't confront them again tonight. But I couldn't resist one last look. I launched my drone from the porch and watched the live feed on my tablet. From above, the construction site looked like a scar of silver slicing through the landscape, dividing the floodplain in two. On one side, the water spread evenly, rippling through cattails. On the other, it stagnated, forming a rising pool against the base of the gravel mound. The footage was terrifying. It confirmed what I'd been saying all along: the road was acting as a dam. At 2 a.m., the power flickered, then went out completely. I stepped outside, rain hammering my face, flashlight beam trembling. The wind howled like a freight train through the trees. I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but the drone's camera showed enough. The water had reached the top of the embankment. And that's when I saw it, a dark figure standing at the construction site, drenched umbrella inverted by the wind. Brooke. She was yelling orders into her phone, her voice snatched away by the storm. I wanted to shout to tell her to get out, but the wind swallowed my words. A moment later, the earth groaned, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through my boots. The first section of gravel slumped, spilling muddy water across the road. The flood had begun to chew its way through the barrier. I recorded every second of it. Lightning illuminated Brooke's face, pale and horrified, as the community connector she'd bragged about began to buckle. The storm had no patience for arrogance. I whispered into the recorder, Day 10. The road is failing. Nature's taking back the deed. And as thunder rolled across Cedar Hollow, I couldn't help but think it wasn't vengeance. It was correction. By morning, the storm had eased to a gray drizzle, but the damage was already written across the landscape like a scar. The once green marsh behind my house was a dull brown mirror, rippling with runoff that had nowhere to go. The air smelled of diesel, wet earth, and failure. From my porch, I could see the half-finished access road sagging under its own weight, one end already tilting downward, where the ground beneath had given way. Brooke Langford didn't wait for the water to dry before resuming work. By noon, the rumble of heavy machinery was back, backhoes, rollers, trucks hauling more gravel. She wasn't slowing down, she was doubling down. Pride can't stand silence, and the rain had given her just enough pause to feel defiant. I walked down to the site, camera slung around my neck, boots sinking into the mud. Workers were shouting over the sound of engines. Push it up, pack it tighter. The foreman glanced at me but didn't bother to stop me. He knew who I was by now, the man with the camera, the nuisance, the ghost that never stopped recording. Brooke stood near the embankment with her husband Paul, both wearing reflective vests that still somehow looked fashionable. She turned when she saw me. "Ah, the documentarian himself," she said brightly. "Come to watch us fix your little drainage issue. You can't fix what you don't understand," I said, wiping rain from my lens. "Every truckload you dump raises the water level higher." She gestured to the excavators as if they were proof of progress. "Actually, Daniel, our new drainage culverts are state-of-the-art. My husband's company installed them just this morning." I looked at the gleaming steel pipes half buried in mud and felt my stomach turn. "They're 3 feet too high. Water doesn't drain uphill." Her smirk faltered for the briefest second, then returned. "You're always so dramatic." "Hydrology isn't drama," I snapped. "It's physics." Paul stepped forward, wiping his hands on a towel. "Look, Mercer, you've made your point. But the community voted. The road's happening. You can stand in the rain and lecture us all you want, but you can't stop progress." I met his gaze. Progress isn't dumping concrete over a wetland. It's learning not to. He opened his mouth to retort, but a crack of thunder rolled across the sky, cutting him off. The storm wasn't done. That night, another band of rain swept through. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling windows, bending the treetops. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the water rise inch by inch up the embankment until it spilled over the edge in thin streams. I logged the measurements every hour, documenting what the HOA refused to see. By 3 a.m., the runoff had reached the base of the neighborhood. Porch lights flickered. The frogs had gone silent again. At dawn, the county emergency alert pinged my phone, flash flood watch, in effect for Cedar Hollow. I wasn't surprised. I drove down to the construction site in my pickup, wipers slashing across the windshield. What I saw made my chest tighten. Half of the new road had already sunk by a foot. Cracks split the asphalt like veins. Pools of water sat trapped on the high side, shimmering like mercury. And standing right in the middle of it, as if daring nature to defy her again, was Brooke. She was in heels on a flooding road, shouting at her workers to fill the cracks with fresh gravel. "We can stabilize it," she yelled. "Just get more trucks in." One of the men hesitated. "Ma'am, the ground's moving. It's not safe." "Do it," she snapped, voice shrill against the wind. I climbed out of my truck. "You're gonna kill someone," I shouted. She turned toward me, eyes blazing. "Stay out of this, Daniel. You've been a problem since day one." "I'm not the problem," I said. "Gravity is. Enough." She jabbed a finger toward the nearest deputy, who stood by his cruiser coat, pulled tight against the rain. "Officer, this man is trespassing." Deputy Cole Haskins looked between us, clearly miserable. "Ma'am, it's his property. There's not much I can." Then arrest him for obstruction, she barked. Cole sighed, rubbing his forehead. I'm not arresting anybody in the middle of a storm. Look, both of you, maybe it's best we shut down the site until the weather clears. No. Brooks' voice cracked. We're finishing this road. The foreman shook his head. Not today, we're not, he said quietly. You've got sinkholes forming under the grade. We're done until it's dry. Brooke glared at him, then at me, then stomped back toward her SUV. Fine, she hissed. But if that man posts another video, I'll sue him for defamation. She drove off tires, spinning mud. Cole watched her go, then turned to me. You've got patience, Mercer. I'd have let the flood teach her already. It will, I said. Soon enough. He frowned. You think it'll really flood? I gestured toward the dark horizon. It already is. That afternoon, I sent the latest footage and data to Evelyn. She called back within minutes. Daniel, this is incredible evidence. I've filed the injunction and sent copies to the State Environmental Office. They'll freeze construction as soon as they see this. I exhaled, finally feeling something like relief. How long? 48 hours. Maybe less. 48 hours. That was the window between justice and disaster. But Cedar Hollow didn't have 48 hours. That night, the rain returned with vengeance. Sheets of water slammed against the roof like fists. I could hear the roar of runoff echoing through the marsh. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. What I saw froze me in place. My wetland was gone. In its place, a churning lake stretched across the horizon, reflecting the lightning like shattered glass. The access road cut straight through it now, a black ridge dividing the floodwaters. On the north side, the neighborhood lights flickered. On the south, my property groaned under the weight of trapped water. I aimed my flashlight at the culverts. Both were completely submerged. Water wasn't draining anymore. It was pressing, building, waiting for release. A shadow moved in the distance. Brooke again standing near the top of the road in a rain poncho, shouting into her phone. Even from far away, I could tell she was panicking. The storm was stronger than her ego. I climbed the ridge mud, sucking at my boots. Brooke, I yelled. Get your people out of here. She turned eyes wide, mascara running. We can still fix it. There's nothing left to fix. Lightning exploded across the sky, and in that flash I saw the first fracture crawl across the asphalt. It was spider-thin at first, then widened with a deep, sickening crack. Water surged through the gap like a beast unchained. Brooke, run, I shouted. But she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at her masterpiece coming apart. The road gave way with a roar that drowned everything else. A wall of water burst through the breach, ripping gravel fences and debris with it. The flood tore down the slope, racing toward the cul-de-sac below. I stumbled backward, barely catching my balance. The current was too strong. Cars floated past like toys. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard Brooke scream, a short, desperate sound swallowed by thunder. I managed to reach higher ground, soaked and shaking, watching as Cedar Hollow vanished beneath a brown, writhing tide. The highway she built had finally connected everything, every gutter, every drain, every drop of arrogance, straight into the heart of her own neighborhood. Nature wasn't cruel. It was simply efficient. When the roar finally faded, it wasn't silence that followed, it was disbelief. The flood hadn't just carved through Brooks Road. It had rewritten the entire map of Cedar Hollow. From my hill, I could see faint orange glows where transformers had blown the faint wail of sirens weaving through sheets of rain and rooftops, glistening under flashes of lightning. The community connector was gone, split wide open like a wound. Water rushed through it, furious and unstoppable. I waded through knee-deep mud to where my wetland used to breathe freely. Now it was a reservoir, its surface broken by floating debris, shingles, trash cans, even someone's garden gnome. The frogs that once sang here were silent, replaced by the guttural groan of water pushing against trapped air pockets. Somewhere in the distance, a woman was screaming. It took me a moment to realize it was Brooke. I spotted her near what remained of the asphalt ridge, soaked to the bone, clinging to a twisted piece of guardrail. Her once white blazer was streaked with mud, her blonde hair plastered to her face. Even in the chaos, she looked like a ghost of her own arrogance, stubbornly alive, still trying to command something that no longer listened. Brooke, I shouted, struggling against the current. You need to move. The road's collapsing. She turned toward me, voice trembling but defiant. It's not supposed to do this, Paul said the grade would hold. He said, Paul's wrong, I yelled. Everything about this is wrong. Another crack split the air louder than thunder. The rest of the road began to crumble, giant slabs of asphalt folding inward like paper. The water surged forward, sweeping away everything in its path. Brooke lost her grip, slipping into the current. I didn't think. I dove after her. The water was ice. Cold, churning, violent. I caught a glimpse of her red jacket spinning in the flood and kicked toward it with everything I had. Branches and debris slammed into my shoulders, one cutting a gash across my forearm. The current dragged me under the world, going dark and muffled like drowning inside a heartbeat. I fought upward, gasping for air. When I surfaced, Brooke was only a few feet ahead, clutching a floating beam. "Hold on," I shouted. "I can't," she cried. "It's too strong." I kicked forward, grabbed the beam, and together we drifted toward a line of half-submerged mailboxes. With one last push, I managed to haul us onto a collapsed fence just high enough to break the current. We lay there for a long time, coughing, shivering, surrounded by water and the smell of diesel. Finally, she spoke, voice barely audible. You tried to warn me." "Yes," I said, "and you fined me for it." Her lip-quivered eyes darting toward the drowned neighborhood. "The houses, the families." "Gone," I said quietly. "All because you wanted convenience." Brooke didn't answer. She just stared into the distance, her body trembling, not from cold, but from realization. For the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't speaking, smiling, or spinning excuses. She was watching her empire dissolve. We stayed there until dawn. When the rain stopped, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. No birds, no frogs, just the occasional creak of timber and the soft hiss of receding water. When daylight finally broke, Cedar Hollow was unrecognizable. Streets had become rivers, cars lay piled like driftwood, and entire lawns had been erased. The HOA clubhouse, Brooke's pride and joy, was half collapsed, its roof folded inward. I filmed everything, every angle, every ruin, not for revenge anymore, for record. A helicopter thundered overhead, then circled back. Rescue teams were arriving. Brooke sat beside me, her face pale, lips blue. "Do you think they'll blame me?" she asked softly. I stared at her. "Brooke, they won't have to. Your signature's on every permit." Tears welled in her eyes, cutting clean lines through the mud on her cheeks. "I thought I was helping people." "You were helping yourself," I said. "That's the difference." When the rescue team reached us, they threw ropes from an inflatable raft. A young firefighter helped Brooke aboard first. She tried to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. When it was my turn, he grabbed my arm. "You're Mercer, right?" he shouted over the engine. "The guy who warned them?" "Yeah," I said, exhausted. He shook his head in disbelief. "Whole county's talking about you. You probably saved lives." I looked back at the flooded neighborhood. Didn't save enough. By midday, we were at a makeshift triage site on higher ground, a church parking lot now filled with cots and emergency tents. Families huddled under tarps, their faces hollow. Children clutched soaked teddy bears. One man sat on the curb staring at what was left of his pickup truck. The storm had erased years in a single night. Reporters arrived soon after. Microphones, cameras, questions. "Mr. Mercer, did you try to stop the project? Did the HOA ignore your warnings? Do you believe this was preventable?" "Yes," I said to all of it. Every bit of this was preventable. That night, as emergency crews pumped water out of basements, I found myself back at my porch. Somehow my house still stood mud-caked, but intact, perched just high enough to survive. My cameras and gauges had recorded everything. I copied the data to multiple drives, labeling them with cold precision: flood event, evidence file, Hasson. Evelyn called just before midnight. "I saw the news," she said. "The state's already investigating. Your footage, it's gold. The Corps of Engineers, FEMA, EPA, they're all watching now." I exhaled. "Maybe now they'll believe me." "They will," she said. "And when they do that, HOA's going to wish it had listened." Outside, lightning flickered faintly in the distance, far beyond the horizon. I sat down on the porch steps, letting the cool night air wash over me. The frogs had started to return their croaks, faint, tentative, but alive. Somehow that sound broke me more than the storm had. Nature was already healing. People not so much. From the wreckage below, I could see flashlights moving where volunteers searched for survivors. The community Brooke had sworn to modernize was now held together by borrowed blankets and quiet prayers. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Before heading inside, I looked once more toward the broken stretch of road still jutting out of the floodwater. The asphalt gleamed under moonlight, a monument to arrogance. Brooke had tried to conquer the land. The land had reminded her who was in charge. I whispered into the dark, "You win, old friend. You always do." Then I shut the door, and the sound of frogs swallowed the silence again. By sunrise the next morning, Cedar Hollow looked like a battlefield, silent, broken, and strangely beautiful in its devastation. Helicopters thumped overhead, their spotlights crawling over what was left of manicured lawns now buried beneath brown water. The once proud subdivision sign that read, "Welcome to Cedar Hollow Estates," leaned sideways, half submerged in mud. I stood beside a group of FEMA agents as they surveyed the wreckage, my boots sinking into the same ground I'd defended for years. The lead investigator, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, introduced herself as Agent Ramirez from the Army Corps of Engineers. Her tone was brisk, professional, the voice of someone who'd seen disasters born from arrogance too many times. "You're Daniel Mercer, correct?" I nodded. She flipped through a clipboard thick with printouts. "We received your complaints, your photos, your drone footage. You warned them 6 separate times about the hydrological risks." 7, I corrected quietly. The 7th was the one nobody read. She sighed, scanning the horizon where houses still stood in water up to their windowsills. "Mr. Mercer, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never seen a clearer case of negligence. Whoever authorized that road, they didn't just ignore the law, they rewrote it." Brooke Langford sat about 30 feet away under a Red Cross tent, wrapped in a blanket, her hair still damp. She looked nothing like the HOA president who used to bark orders in bright blazers. Her phone had been confiscated. Her husband Paul was speaking to county deputies near the wreckage of his truck. I watched as she kept glancing toward me, half in fear, half in guilt. Ramirez followed my gaze. "She's already being questioned," she said. "County Zoning Board, EPA, even the district attorney's office wants statements. The press will have a field day." "They already are," I muttered. Reporters had been camped at the church parking lot since dawn. I'd seen the headlines on my phone. "HOA Road Project Causes Catastrophic Flood, President Under Investigation." Local environmental consultant warned. For months nobody listened. When Ramirez finished her questions, she asked if I could guide them through the site. I agreed. We trudged down what used to be Willow Creek Drive. Every few steps I pointed out landmarks that no longer existed. That was the clubhouse foundation. That used to be the storm drain line. This was my boundary marker before they moved it. The agent took notes, snapping photos. At one point she crouched beside a collapsed culvert and gestured to the blockage of concrete and roots. "This was their drainage system," I nodded. 2 culverts, both 3 feet above the natural flow line. Water had no exit. She shook her head slowly. "They didn't build a road, Mr. Mercer. They built a dam." By midday emergency, crews began towing cars from what remained of the cul-de-sacs. Volunteers handed out bottled water and sandwiches. The neighborhood's perfect symmetry, the HOA's pride, was gone, replaced by chaos that looked strangely honest. As I helped an older couple carry boxes from their half-flooded home, one of them, Mrs. Garner, grabbed my sleeve. "We're so sorry," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "We called you stubborn before. We thought you were exaggerating. You couldn't have known," I said. "No," she replied. "We just didn't want to know." That night I met Evelyn at the county courthouse. She looked exhausted, but exhilarated the way lawyers do when they smell victory. "The injunction finally came through," she said, dropping a folder onto the table. "A little late, but it'll still bury them. The state's filing charges falsification of documents, unauthorized, alteration of protected land, reckless endangerment, maybe even fraud, if we can tie in the forged permits." I glanced through the paperwork pages, thick with signatures and stamps. "They'll blame the storm," I said quietly. "They'll call it an act of God." Evelyn smirked. "Then I'll remind the jury that God didn't pour the concrete." We drove back through Cedar Hollow after dusk. The rescue lights cast eerie red reflections on the water's surface. At the edge of my property, I stopped the truck and stepped out. The frogs were back, singing louder now, as if reclaiming the soundscape. The air smelled cleaner, fresher, even through the ruin. Brooke's house sat on what used to be the main road, or rather what was left of it. The first floor was completely gutted drywall, hanging like wet paper. She was on the porch, sitting on a crate, staring at the black water lapping her front steps. I almost kept driving, but something in me stopped. She looked up as I approached. "Come to gloat?" she asked hoarsely. "No," I said. "To make sure you're alive." She gave a bitter laugh. "Alive, sure. But everything else is gone." I didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of distant generators. Finally she spoke again. "They told me the insurance won't cover any of it. Illegal construction," they said. "Paul's contracting license is under review. The HOA board dissolved this morning. Everyone's suing me." I studied her for a moment. That road wasn't just illegal, Brooke. It was suicidal. Her eyes glistened. "I thought I was improving the neighborhood, making it worth more. I just wanted people to respect me. They would have, I said, if you'd respected the land first. She looked away. You warned me, she whispered. I didn't listen. No, I said softly, but the water did. For a long while we just stood there, two soaked silhouettes framed by a world we'd both tried to control in different ways. When I finally turned to leave, she said quietly, Daniel, I stopped. Do you hate me? I hesitated. No, I said. I hate what you stood for. I left her there staring into the remnants of her empire while thunder rumbled far off toward the horizon. Over the next few days, investigators swarmed the area. County engineers mapped the floodplain, reporters filmed live segments, and volunteers helped residents salvage what they could. Every night I uploaded new footage, time-stamped and cross-referenced with rainfall data. The evidence told a simple story: greed built a wall, gravity tore it down. 3 days later, the governor's office announced a formal inquiry. Brooke and Paul Langford were subpoenaed for questioning. Evelyn and I were asked to testify as witnesses. The news called it the Cedar Hollow collapse. Environmental activists called it justice by rain. When I returned home that evening, the last of the floodwater had drained away, leaving behind a raw, glistening scar of exposed earth. My wetlands, bruised, battered, but still breathing, had begun to refill naturally. Reeds pushed through the mud again, small green flags of resilience. I knelt at the water's edge and touched the cool surface. It reflected the fading sunset like a mirror. For the first time in months, I felt peace. But peace, like wetlands, must be protected. I knew the fight wasn't over. There would be court dates, depositions, endless paperwork. Brooke's arrogance had built the road, but bureaucracy would try to bury the truth under another kind of concrete legal procedural slow. I'd make sure that didn't happen. As I walked back to my porch, I heard the distant echo of frogs rising again, a steady rhythm, ancient and forgiving. Nature had survived its trial. Now it was our turn. And this time I wouldn't let anyone forget what the water had said. 2 weeks after the flood, Cedar Hollow was still half buried in mud, but the news trucks had stopped coming. The headlines had moved on to other tragedies, and the cameras that once swarmed the broken road now pointed somewhere else. Yet for those of us who lived here, the storm had never really left. The air still smelled of wet drywall and gasoline. The hum of generators was our new lullaby. I spent those days walking with federal investigators through what was left of the neighborhood, helping them piece together the timeline. They carried clipboards and laser scanners, but it was my drone footage that told the story best. Each frame showed the same truth: water-blocked pressure, building collapse inevitable. Mr. Mercer Agent Ramirez said one morning as we stood on the skeletal remains of the access road, "You realize this case will become precedent. Every HOA in the state will cite this investigation." I nodded. Good. Maybe they'll think before paving over the next wetland. Behind us, dump trucks hauled away what was left of Brooke Langford's dream. The asphalt was being cut into sections stacked like tombstones. Somewhere under the mud lay the golden shovel she'd used at her ribbon-cutting ceremony. Brooke herself hadn't been seen in days. Rumor had it she and Paul had moved into a motel near the county courthouse waiting for their arraignment. Evelyn kept me updated: daily court schedules, interviews, the endless machinery of justice grinding forward. When the summons came, I felt nothing but fatigue. The courthouse smelled of old wood and damp paper. Reporters crowded the steps, shoving microphones toward anyone in a suit. Inside the hearing room buzzed with the low murmur of spectators, displaced homeowners, environmental advocates, and the inevitable handful of HOA loyalists who still believed Brooke had been trying her best. She sat at the defendant's table, thinner, now her hands folded tightly on the tabletop. Her trademark red blazer had been replaced by a plain gray coat. When she saw me enter, her eyes flickered guilt, fear, maybe relief. It didn't matter. The prosecutor, a sharp-voiced woman named Linda Cho, opened with precision. She laid out maps, permits, drone footage, and emails that Evelyn and I had collected. Every lie Brooke had told unfolded in high definition: falsified zoning overlays, unauthorized excavation orders, and an HOA board vote that never reached quorum. Then came the footage, my footage. The big screen showed the storm tearing through the road, the flood bursting across lawns. Gasps filled the courtroom. Someone in the back whispered, "That's my house." Brooke buried her face in her hands. When it was my turn to testify, the bailiff swore me in. I spoke plainly, the way I always had, about the wetlands' purpose, the Clean Water Act, the ignored warnings. I showed them the hydrology models I'd built before the project even started. Models that predicted almost perfectly how the flood would unfold. "Mr. Mercer," the prosecutor asked, "why did you keep documenting even when no one listened?" I looked toward the jury box. "Because water remembers," I said, "and someday it would need proof." A silence settled over the room. The judge finally nodded. Noted. By late afternoon, the verdict was in. Guilty on all counts: forgery, reckless endangerment, and violation of federal environmental law. The courtroom murmured as the judge read the sentence: 18 months probation, heavy restitution, permanent ban from any HOA or real estate leadership position. It wasn't prison, but it was ruin. Brooke didn't cry. She just exhaled, shoulders sagging as if the fight had finally drained from her bones. When court adjourned, she turned to me. "You were right," she whispered. "I didn't want to be," I replied. Outside, the reporters swarmed again, lights flashing. Evelyn nudged me toward the steps. "Say something," she urged. I faced the cameras. "This wasn't nature's fault," I said. "It was ours. The land did what it's always done: absorb, release, recover. It was people who forgot how to listen." That clip aired on every local channel that night. The next morning, environmental forums were already calling Cedar Hollow a turning point. Legislators proposed stricter oversight for HOA construction projects. The county announced new flood zone audits. For once, paperwork worked in favor of the planet. A week later, FEMA teams began dismantling what was left of the damaged infrastructure. My wetland, scarred but alive, became the center of a new restoration initiative. They asked me to consult. I agreed on one condition: no concrete, ever. Evelyn laughed when I said it, but the engineers took me seriously. Together, we designed a low-impact walkway, wood, not asphalt, snaking gently over the recovering marsh. The water shimmered beneath the planks, reeds already pushing through again. One afternoon, while the crews worked, a county deputy truck pulled up. Deputy Cole Haskins climbed out, hat in hand. "Thought I'd stop by," he said. "Never got to thank you proper." "For what?" "For saving half this county from drowning worse than it did." He hesitated. "And for proving me wrong. I thought it was just another neighbor squabble." I gave him a tired smile. That's how every disaster starts: someone thinks it's just a squabble. Before he left, he added quietly, "Langford's moved out. Sold what's left of their house. Folks say she's working at a community garden downstate. Seems humbled." I didn't respond. Part of me hoped it was true. The other part didn't care. As summer settled in, the neighborhood slowly transformed. The HOA no longer existed. Residents formed a cooperative called Cedar Hollow Stewardship Group. No presidents, no fines, just shared maintenance and mutual respect for the land. They even voted to rename the road that replaced Brooks' failed highway, Mercer Crossing. I protested the name, but they insisted. "You earned it," Mrs. Garner told me. "You gave us back the ground we lost." On the one-year anniversary of the flood, we held a small memorial by the marsh. Families lit floating lanterns, each carrying a wish or apology written in marker. Brooke didn't come, but someone mailed a card. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "I finally understand what stewardship means. The garden's growing. Thank you for showing me the hard way. BL." I slipped the card into my field journal and said nothing. The land didn't need forgiveness, and neither did I. As dusk fell, the frogs began their evening chorus. The children laughed, splashing their feet in the shallows. The water glowed gold under the setting sun, reflecting everything: ruin, renewal, and the thin line between the two. Evelyn stood beside me, watching the lanterns drift. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. I shook my head. "After all this, no. Someone has to make sure the land keeps breathing." She smiled. "Then breathe with it." For the first time since the storm, I did. I closed my eyes and inhaled the scent of clean rain, new reeds, and something that felt like absolution. The wind whispered across the marsh, gentle, almost human. The wetland had survived greed, neglect, and concrete. It would survive me too. And as the last lantern disappeared into the distance, I realized the story wasn't about loss at all. It was about memory. The earth never forgets. It just waits for us to listen again. 6 months after the court ruling, Cedar Hollow was nearly unrecognizable, not in ruin, but in rebirth. The mud that once choked every yard had turned fertile green with wildflowers. The frogs were back in full chorus, and so were the herons, landing in the shallows like ghosts returned to their rightful home. What had once been Brooke Langford's doomed monument to progress was now a federal restoration site, officially labeled Cedar Hollow Wetland Preserve. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Every morning I'd walk the wooden boardwalk that stretched across the marsh, clipboard in hand, coffee thermos in the other. My job now wasn't fighting developers, it was guiding the volunteers who came from nearby schools and universities to study the recovery. They planted cattails, recorded water levels, and listened when I told them about hydrology, about how the earth remembers what balance feels like, even when people forget. The first few weeks after the flood had been chaos: insurance adjusters, legal filings, news reporters, and county officials trying to save face. But time, like water, has a way of washing things clean. Most of the homeowners rebuilt smaller, simpler houses farther from the marsh's edge. The HOA was gone, legally dissolved, its debts absorbed by the county. In its place was the Cedar Hollow Cooperative, a community council that met monthly under the open sky. No fines, no power suits, no mandatory compliance letters. At the first meeting, Mrs. Garner stood and said, "Maybe we should start with gratitude. The man we used to call a troublemaker turned out to be the one who saved us." Everyone clapped. I tried to sink into my chair, embarrassed. I wasn't a hero. I was just stubborn enough to outlast their mistakes. Even Brooke's name had faded into silence. The lawsuit stripped her of everything: her company, her house, her reputation. The court ordered her to perform 800 hours of community service under environmental supervision. Word got around that she was working at a city greenhouse downstate teaching kids how to plant native species. Evelyn once showed me a news photo of her smiling awkwardly in a dirt-stained apron surrounded by saplings. "Progress looks different on her now," Evelyn said. "It took me months to forgive her, not for what she'd done to the land, but for what she'd awakened in me. Anger is easy to grow like weeds. Letting it die takes patience." In late spring, the county invited me to speak at a conference on sustainable development. I almost said no, but Evelyn insisted. "You've spent your life warning people," she said. "Now they're finally listening. Don't waste it." So I went. The room was filled with planners, architects, and mayors, the same type of people I used to fight against. My presentation was simple satellite footage, rainfall data, and the story of one road that drowned a town. I ended with a single slide, a photo of the restored marsh glowing gold under the morning Sunday. I told them nature isn't an obstacle to overcome. It's the infrastructure that keeps everything else standing. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then slowly they applauded. Afterward, a young city planner approached me. "Mr. Mercer," she said shyly, "I grew up in Cedar Hollow. My parents lost our house in the flood. I just wanted to say thank you." I didn't know what to say. Gratitude, like forgiveness, can be heavier than guilt. Back home, life had settled into rhythm again. Evelyn visited often, sometimes for work, sometimes just to sit by the water and drink coffee. We'd talk about small things: how fast the reeds were growing, which birds had returned, whether the frogs were louder this year. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she asked, "Do you ever regret not leaving when you had the chance?" I thought about that for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "Leaving means forgetting. And this land deserves to be remembered." That night, I found myself walking alone through the marsh under a half moon. The water shimmered like liquid glass. Every step on the boardwalk echoed softly. At the far end, near where the old asphalt had once cut the landscape in half, a single heron stood motionless in the shallows, its reflection perfect. I stopped there for a while, watching. The air smelled of pine and wet soil, and somewhere in the reeds a chorus of frogs began to sing. It wasn't just sound, it was life returning exactly as it had before, all the noise before the concrete. I pulled a folded letter from my pocket, the last one Brooke had sent. "Daniel, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally understand what you meant about balance. I teach children now. We plant marsh grass and talk about how roots hold water, how small things protect big things. Every time I see a seed sprout, I think about what I buried before pride, ignorance, asphalt. Thank you for not hating me when I made it easy to." Brooke, the paper had smudges from soil and fingerprints. I folded it carefully and tucked it back into my journal. When I returned home, Evelyn was still sitting on the porch, the glow from her laptop lighting her face. "Working?" I asked. She smiled. "Writing a proposal. They want to expand the restoration grant. Maybe turn the area into an official conservation center. Call it what it is," I said. "A second chance." She looked up at me then, toward the marsh. "You really think people can learn from this?" I took a deep breath, the night air cool against my lungs. Maybe not everyone, I admitted. But the land never forgets the lesson. It teaches until we listen. She closed the laptop and leaned back. "You sound like a philosopher." "I'm just a hydrologist who finally learned to shut up and observe," I said, smiling faintly. The sky above Cedar Hollow was clear again for the first time in months. Stars reflected off the marsh, scattered across the surface like shattered glass, slowly coming back together. I thought of my father, the man who first taught me to read the language of water. "You don't own land," he used to say. "You borrow it, and when it's time you give it back better than you found it." For the first time since the storm, I felt like I finally had. The flood had destroyed property lines, reputations, and illusions. But it had also revealed what truly mattered, not ownership, but guardianship. Not punishment, but renewal. As the frogs sang louder and the night deepened, I whispered into the breeze, "You can rest now." The land didn't answer in words, but I swear, it breathed back, quiet, patient, alive. And in that moment I realized that what Brooke called destruction, the earth had simply called correction. 1 year later, Cedar Hollow had become the kind of place people visited for peace instead of property value. Tour buses came through twice a month, their passengers whispering like they were in a cathedral as they crossed the new wooden boardwalk winding through the restored wetlands. The air was thick with the sound of life, crickets, frogs, wind stirring the reeds. For the first time since the flood, the land looked the way it was always meant to look, alive, stubborn, forgiving. I still lived in the same small farmhouse on the hill. It wasn't fancy, but the porch light worked, and the smell of rain drifted in every evening. My mornings began the same way: black coffee, a camera slung around my neck, and a slow walk to the water line. I didn't film for evidence anymore. I filmed because I didn't want to forget how fragile everything was. The county had officially designated the place as Cedar Hollow Wetland Research Reserve, and they asked me to stay on as director. It was a strange title for someone who never wanted to be in charge of anything, but it felt right. I didn't give orders. I listened to the water, to the wind, to the people who came here hoping to learn from what had gone wrong. Some days school kids came by on field trips. They'd run down the boardwalks with binoculars and clipboards, shouting when they spotted herons or snapping turtles. I'd tell them, "Every puddle here has a memory. Be gentle with it." They'd nod, not really understanding, but one day they would. Every once in a while, reporters still called. "Mr. Mercer, can you describe how you feel now, a year after the disaster?" they'd ask. I always gave the same answer. It wasn't a disaster. It was a reminder. They never quite knew what to do with that quote. Evelyn visited often. She'd quit her law firm and opened a small practice focused solely on environmental protection cases. The media called her the flood lawyer, which she pretended to hate but secretly enjoyed. One afternoon in late May, she sat beside me on the observation deck, notebook in hand, hair tied back against the breeze. "They're talking about building a nature education center right there," she said, pointing toward the far bank. "Classrooms, walking trails, community events. They even want to name it after you." I laughed. "No one's going to visit a building called the Mercer Environmental Pavilion." She grinned. "I don't know. Has a nice ring to it. Name it after the land," I said. It did all the work. A silence fell between us, the kind of easy quiet that only comes after surviving something together. She turned a page in her notebook. "You ever hear from her?" I didn't have to ask who. "Brooke," I said. "Once, maybe 2 months ago. A postcard. She's still running that greenhouse program downstate. Says she's helping rebuild a wetland near the coast." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Poetic. Redemption usually is," I said. Brooke's postcard sat pinned above my desk, a watercolor of wild irises painted over her own words. The flood taught me what control really means: letting go. That evening, I gave a talk to a group of graduate students from the state university. They were studying flood management and had come to see the site where it all began. I stood on the same spot where Brooke's illegal highway once cut the marsh in half. The road was gone, now replaced by native grasses that swayed under the setting sun. "You see this," I said, pointing to the shimmering water. "This is what patience looks like. The ground remembers every mistake we make, and every act of care, too." A student raised her hand. "Do you ever miss what it was before? The town, the homes?" I thought for a moment. "I miss the people," I said, "not the concrete." When the lecture ended, I stayed alone for a while. The last light of day turned everything gold: the reeds, the water, even the remnants of old fence posts sticking from the mud like bones. I found one of the original steel stakes Brooke's crew had driven into the soil, that first day, the orange paint still faint beneath rust. I pulled it free, wiped it clean, and planted it upright beside the boardwalk. From now on, it would mark the spot where arrogance met gravity. That night, storms gathered again over the horizon, gentle ones this time, harmless and slow. Thunder rolled in the distance like a tired old drum. The rain came soft, steady, cleansing. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, and watched it soak into the ground. The frogs began singing louder and louder until the whole valley pulsed with sound. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was rhythm balance, life in tune with itself. I thought about how everything had started: a letter from the HOA, a fine for standing water, a smirk from a woman who believed progress was measured in asphalt. If I hadn't fought back, there wouldn't be any of this. The flood hadn't destroyed Cedar Hollow. It had rewritten it. Some nights I still dream of that moment, the roar of the dam breaking the road, splitting apart like judgment made visible. But in the dream's end, the water always recedes, leaving behind something cleaner. The phone buzzed on the porch railing. It was Evelyn. "Checking in," she said. "You see the forecast, rain again." "I see it," I replied, smiling. "And for once, I'm not worried." "You've really made peace with it, haven't you?" she asked. "With the storm," I said. "No, with myself." We hung up, and I listened to the rain until it blurred into the croaks of frogs and the distant hum of the night. When dawn came, mist drifted low over the marsh like breath on glass. I walked the length of the boardwalk, camera in hand, stopping every few steps to take pictures. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky so cleanly that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. In that mirror I saw it all: the past, the flood, the rebuilding, every loss turned lesson. The land had healed, and in some small way so had we. At the end of the boardwalk stood a small bronze plaque installed by the new cooperative. It read, "Cedar Hollow, wetland preserve destroyed by ignorance, restored by resilience, dedicated to those who listen when the land speaks." I traced the letters with my fingers, smiled, and whispered the same words I'd said the day the flood ended. Nature doesn't argue, it audits. Then I turned back toward the rising sun, the air alive with sound, and walked home through a world finally learning to breathe again.